Hello everybody, and welcome once again to another episode of RAD TV live at 525 here on Chittenden County Channel 17, local Channel 17, CCTV, Center for Media Democracy and Town Meeting Television. For those of you who aren't yet acquainted with Rights and Democracy, Rights and Democracy is a grassroots, people-powered organization committed to creating an independent political movement for long-lasting fundamental change. They're working on all of this in both Vermont and New Hampshire. They've been doing this for about 3 years now. And so we do this monthly show to try to show everybody what they've been doing out in the community and in the state. And this month, well, I'm your host, Grant Taylor. And this month I have a couple of guests with me. First, over to my right is Vermont State Representative from Chittenden 6-4, Selena Colburn. Yes.
Got it.
Prefer Selena, yes?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Okay, cool. Down on the end is Elise Greaves, the Political Engagement Director for Rights and Democracy at the moment.
Coordinator.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right on, welcome. Thanks again for coming on the show and
good to be here.
Joining us. So I guess I just wanted to get started. I'm trying to catch up on our reactions from the midterms and how we see this working good or bad in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been, I just was at a all-day legislative briefing yesterday preparing for the session, and also got to participate just a small amount on Monday night in the freshman orientation. So incoming legislators get a nice 2-day orientation to the building, the process, and it's just such an exciting group of new legislators coming in, especially House members. It's predominantly House members just because the House is bigger. And I know Rights and Democracy worked with a lot of these people as candidates, and the energy feels really strong with this group. They're ready to get going. You know, tons of them showed up for this initial meeting of the Climate Caucus that we had yesterday. And I think they're going to pull the House to the left. So it's not just a matter of having picked up seats for the House Democratic and Progressive caucuses in terms of the math, but that there really is a shift to kind of, we've elected some real small p progressive champions that are going to be great for those of us who care about the environment, who care about working families, who care about social, racial justice. So I'm very excited to work with them.
That's cool. You hear about new energy.
Yeah. We love that.
That's what we're all about.
Yeah. So for those watching who don't know, one big piece of Rights and Democracy's mission is to support candidates, like Selena said, both big P and small p champions, so that we can pass, the legislation that we've been working on, and the organizing that we've been doing, and get some wins. So it's great to hear that you foresee that happening over the next couple of years, and certainly with the election we had some big wins, especially in the House. We were again trying to win a veto-proof majority, and we succeeded. So I'm really looking forward to this legislative session. And of course, there were some disappointed losses across the state as well, and the governor's race for me personally was a disappointment, but we just have to keep organizing, and there's a lot to work on. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Now, talking about that orientation, you went through that 2 years ago?
Yeah, just 2 years ago.
And we're also a part of our endorsement process,
That's right?
With
Yes.
Rights and Democracy.
Yeah, I feel very lucky to have been endorsed by Rights and Democracy in 2 election cycles now.
How has that been for you, not just the endorsement, but also since then in the last 2 years? Have we been able to, coordinate anything and help to express campaigns or help you with your work or anything?
Yeah, well, I was one of the lucky handful of candidates who didn't actually have an opponent in this election cycle this year, which I have a little survivor's guilt about, but was very grateful for on a personal level. But the first year that I ran for the legislature, we had a pretty contested primary. Brian Chena, my district mate, and it was a three-way race for 2 seats, and I really felt like Rights and Democracy made a real difference in the outcome of that race. So we were very grateful for the way that you all were able to just engage members, turn out new voters in the process. And then I think one of the things that I saw Rights and Democracy really step up on in my first session was the minimum wage issue, and really bringing some attention to that, and also many of us participated actually in a minimum wage challenge where we as legislators, where we really experimented with what it was like to live on a minimum wage, which is not actually an unfamiliar experience to me, although it's been a while. But so that was a place where I felt like Rights and Democracy was a strong partner in the State House.
Cool. And I think likewise we enjoy having awesome candidates to stand with. So.
Thanks.
Goes both ways there.
Absolutely.
We're thankful that there's people out there that want to take on the challenge and really get to it. So then I guess the next thing that I wanted to talk about was where we're kind of at with this campaign. Rights and Democracy has a campaign called Raise Up Vermont, and so they've been working to increase the wage to $15 an hour. To provide paid family leave for all workers in the state, and to work against worker misclassification. So recently, I think it was the House and the Senate passed these bills for raising the wage and for paid family leave, sent them to the governor's desk, and he vetoed them. So I guess feeling that energy, where do we see these campaigns going in the future?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question for leadership in both the House and the Senate to really take the pulse of that. But I think it's going to be very interesting for those issues and for a number of issues. You know, we have what some people are calling a super majority. We have kind of simple math. We have the votes to override vetoes that we didn't have before, but that's going to be a very issue by issue. How that plays out in reality is going to really be issue by issue, and we know that not everyone in the Democratic caucus supports a $15 an hour minimum wage, actually, or supports paid family leave. I think we had more support for paid family leave. So I don't want to misrepresent that in any way, but it's going to be very interesting to see how we can move those issues forward. How Republicans vote on those issues. They had some really tough losses this year, and when you listen to Republican leadership talk in the House, they're also talking about maybe their job is not to try to bring Vermonters along with their agenda, but to actually kind of listen to Vermonters and understand what Vermonters' agenda is. So there's a lot that's going to be really interesting, and but I don't think it's like we're going to ride in there and just, all 14 bills that were vetoed we're going to instantly pass them. I think it's going to be very issue by issue, but I'm really hopeful that we're going to see real leadership on both of those issues, because when we're talking about how to attract people to Vermont, how to grow our economy, we heard a lot at our legislative briefing yesterday about some of the demographic challenges that we are genuinely facing in the state. And these are such critical tools. I think many of us see them as critical tools to really do economic development that works for all Vermonters. So. Yeah. I'm hopeful we're going to see real movement on those issues with different outcomes.
Cool.
Absolutely. And I will say too, being out and knocking doors this summer for the election in communities across the state, there is, very wide support for both raising the minimum wage and paid family medical leave insurance. And I think that, like you said, we can't just say, we're done, we have a veto-proof majority, everything's going to come to fruition that we want. We still have to be out there connecting with community members and organizing and, bringing people in to give testimony who have been impacted by these issues. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't been impacted by both or either of those issues. And so I think that, our work is going to be really important moving forward too, and bringing the people's voice and what Vermonters, want to see for their communities and the state into the State House.
Yeah, I'm working on that.
Yeah, and it was, I'll just say, harkening back to my own experience doing the minimum wage challenge, it's been a while since I lived off of a minimum wage, but I spent so much of my, my undergraduate degree was in dance, and I spent a lot of years defaulting on my student loans, working low wage jobs, trying to find, like, I don't come from a family with a lot of money or anything like that, so I, like a lot of people in the arts do, so I spent a long time in very, very low wage jobs, and I still have, unresolved debt as a result of that decades later. And so even taking on a minimum wage challenge as someone who now has, at least on paper, a pretty healthy income by the standards of the state, was challenging for me because of how my experience living in minimum wage jobs is still kind of following my financial profile decades later. And so it's not just a matter of like raising the wage and providing those supports for people. I really learned through that. It really gave me the opportunity to reflect on, it's not just in those moments when you might be in those lower wage jobs, but also like how you're able to build a financial future moving forward,
Absolutely.
So the effects on our economy of raising the wage are really longitudinal, I think, potentially for people.
Not necessarily just about we're going to give you a couple extra $1,000 each year so you can go spend it on on frivolous things.
That's right.
Sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
We understand that sometimes there's exceptions to the rules, but the reasons for doing a lot of these policy changes are to get a greater gain than these small parts of the population that are going to maybe abuse the situation that is benefiting so many others that couldn't possibly make that ends meet, and then also prepare, like you're saying, for your future instead of digging yourself into financial holes and stuff. Yeah. Tricky. I too have worked a few minimum wage jobs. I don't know, Elise, if you experienced any of that.
Yes.
So, but yeah, to keep it from determining your whole future, it does take a different outlook when you're staring at that type of a situation. All right. Well, cool. You mentioned the Climate Caucus earlier, and I think it's really awesome that you have been a part of that. One of the reasons that I am working and volunteering with Rights and Democracy is to protect our natural resources, to protect our environment, to keep the air so that we can kind of breathe it, keep water so we can swim and drink it, and swim in it and drink it, and soils and stuff, and keep trees around and stuff. So how has that been being a part of the Climate Caucus, and then what do you think the next kind of steps are going to be for that group?
So the Climate Solutions Caucus, it's a caucus of, any legislator can join, so it includes House reps and senators, so it's nice to have a space where both bodies can actually work on an issue together. There's not a lot of spaces like that in the legislature outside of the legislative process itself and the kind of conference committee world that happens at the end of the session. And so we just meet every Thursday. Lunch is provided. We work super closely with advocates like the Vermont Natural Resources Council and Energy Independent Vermont, and just a number of, Sierra Club 350 has been involved at times. So it's a really amazing opportunity to come together around these issues and think about how we can move legislation forward. And I serve as the clerk of the Climate Caucus, so I've been able to, really dig in early on in my work with that caucus. And we had just an initial meeting yesterday as part of our legislative briefing to get things going, and it was like a standing room only meeting. Tons of new members came. There was just a lot of energy around and a lot of urgency around wanting to work on these issues. We have kind of a reputation in Vermont for being a super green state. We have, one of the most robust renewable energy economies in the country. But there was a study that came out earlier this year that tracked how we're doing with our statutory goals, and the picture is not good. Our emissions are continuing to go up, even as national trends are actually starting to finally decline. And so we have a lot of work to do to align our perception of ourselves as green leaders.
Is that mostly around the transportation sector?
Transportation is the biggest sector, some business sector emissions as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that combined with some of the really sobering reports that have been released at, nationally and internationally in recent weeks and months, I think provide just a backdrop of real urgency. So I'm hopeful we can see some movement, and we did lay some pretty solid groundwork last session. We actually got a very robust study of carbon pricing mechanisms into the budget itself. So we're going to have some really good data to work with on how that might factor into both economic growth and development and lowering our emissions. I think there's commitment and interest in that group to continue looking at things like banning fossil fuel infrastructure, making sure that funds from the VW settlement go to continuing to build out electric vehicle expansion and capacity, looking at things like regenerative agriculture and sequestration techniques that are a really strong fit that we can kind of be leaders on with our rural agricultural economy. Tons of stuff that we're excited to work on, and that there's definite commitment. And someone yesterday was talking about being interested in revisiting the issue of the state's pension fund and its fossil fuel investments, which there was some good work and progress made in that conversation 2 bienniums ago, but we didn't really dig back into that so much in the last biennium. So there's a lot that people are excited to tackle.
Echoes of the divest movement.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So we're looking at, and the treasurer has done some good and interesting work, kind of more from the shareholder advocacy perspective, and even from building some kind of working in collaboration to potentially build some tools that make it easier to truly divest. And so I think there's potential to work more in collaboration with the Treasurer's Office moving forward. That's, in the past, that issue has kind of been there's advocates advocating for it, that the Treasurer is opposing it. And as someone who's worked at the local level on divestment issues, it's really a tangle, and it's a hard thing to tackle in black and white from either side. So I think there's actually potential for some real interesting collaboration on that issue moving forward if we can get the ship steering in that direction. But that's just like my personal 2 cents. That's not the Climate Caucus position.
No, that's great though. So has there been, I guess, that's like, there's so many different good ideas there, but there was an idea of trying to maybe put a rail line up the center of the interstate to get a couple people moving around. Is that at all part of the transportation discussion?
I don't know as much about that
Yeah.
initiative or that idea, which doesn't mean it's not happening. Yeah.
Interesting. That's okay though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well.
Transportation is definitely what we need to tackle, no doubt about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So then I guess if we've moved on from that, maybe we can get into some of the things that I know that you've been working more with, and around you were mentioning criminal justice reform, and I think it was.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we give you two time at least to talk about, just what you see is what are RAD's priorities. Both of you time to talk about RAD's priorities moving into the legislative session. But I'm happy to talk a little bit about criminal justice reform. I was very lucky in my first term to be able to serve on the House Judiciary Committee, which is a really great committee that works on just super interesting and important issues, and it has a wonderful committee chair, Representative Maxine Grad, who just is a real leader, I think, on criminal justice reform issues. So I'm hoping to be back on that committee, but we won't know until January what our assignments are. But a lot of my work has really focused on looking at issues of substance use disorder and how our criminal justice system is kind of both looking at ways that we could create, so from a criminal justice system perspective, looking at ways that we could create less situations where people are having criminal justice interactions or even being incarcerated that are really a result of substance use issues in the first place, and then for people who do experience those interactions or incarcerations, looking at, on the other side of that, how we can provide supports and potential relief from having those interactions then just really decimate someone's life in terms of their ability to get housing, get employment, supervise their kids' field trips, like all kinds of things that happen when you have particularly a felony charge. But anything on your record that gets quickly really complicates your ability to be in recovery or to stay in recovery. So kind of looking at getting less people in who are really there around substance use issues, and then making sure that people are able to alleviate some of the impacts of those things as they move forward with their life.
More of a through doing more like harm reduction through like a restorative justice model of approaching instead of incarceration.
Right. I mean, in addition to looking at criminal justice interactions, I'm definitely all about increasing treatment access and increasing harm reduction approaches, because that's just basic science of saving people's lives that we need to be doing. But I think there's a bunch of things we can do, like expanding our drug treatment courts across the state. We actually have really unequal access around the state to those kinds of diversionary programs where people can get treatment instead of incarceration. Looking at things like, does possession of any drug need to be a felony? If it's just for personal use, you're not selling it, you're not dispensing it, should that be a felony charge? Should that be a criminal charge at all? Should it be a civil infraction? Should it be maybe, So looking at how we're creating crime in the first place around drug use and dependence, and then on the other side, looking at what kind of sentences we're applying, what kind of access we're giving people to being able to expunge some of those things from their records. All kinds of work to do there, and and also looking at sort of what are the crimes that really commonly accompany drug dependence that aren't just about possession, but some of the crimes that we see as really common.
The effects.
Yeah,
Burglary.
whether it's burglary, forged checks, and what kind of penalties. How are those things following people through the rest of their lives, long after they've kind of moved on from those behaviors. So a lot of work to do there.
Yeah.
Super excited to dig in and try to make some change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for working on that so diligently.
Yeah, and there's tons more criminal justice reform stuff we could talk about, but we just got the 5 minutes, so I feel like I want to make sure you get some time to talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't been looking over there.
A couple more minutes left.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, in all of those areas, right, rights and democracy supports those causes. And those are the kinds of things that we are out talking to folks in communities about, opioid addiction and, that's spreading across the state and kind of those impacts on people's lives, whether or not people can drink the water that's coming out of their taps.
Yeah.
How people are being impacted by climate change. And I think we're seeing, maybe less of that in Vermont, but definitely nationally, right, we're seeing a lot of the impacts. And so, I think that there is a lot of urgency around all of these issues because I think people are starting to realize that, these are real things and, it's up to us to solve them. And then, certainly, as we touched on earlier, raising the wage, paid family medical leave insurance, misclassification, and kind of putting some teeth into misclassification legislation, as well as corporate accountability, are all going to be, big priorities in this legislative session for rights and democracy and what we're going to be organizing around.
All about setting people up better from the beginning, from the get-go.
Absolutely.
Better wage, maybe some access to health care,
Yeah. Let's lift people up so that these, issues of addiction and likely other issues, right, that come out of, poverty and desperation, right, because people aren't being taken care of.
So we just got a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
Was there anything specifically you guys wanted to talk about?
Well, I just say
Shout-outs
as
to
a
anything?
parting thing, for all of you who are out talking to people or people who are watching too, it makes such a big difference when we hear from people in the legislature, when people get activated. I think we saw the impact that engaged Vermonters can make on the gun violence prevention legislation that really got moving last session, thanks to the voices of young people, to just the sense of urgency that people were able to express. And
Real feedback.
Yeah, I would just encourage people to really contact their legislators, stay in touch, let us know what you're thinking. Things can move. Time can stand still a little bit in that building because we have a thoughtful process where we hear from all sides and we try to hear from all political perspectives, and sometimes it really takes urgency from outside the building to make change happen. So I hope the same way we're seeing like a lot of energy from new energy inside the building, I hope we'll see some of that same energy carry out into external pressure on all of us in the coming session, because we need it in that building pretty seriously at times.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, also folks watching want to learn more about how you can help. There is an event that's happening at our offices in Burlington, at the Rights and Democracy offices, called the People Power Party on December 11th at 7 p.m. And that will just be a really good opportunity to meet neighbors and other community members who are working on these issues and interested in these issues, and to learn more about how you can be involved to push the issues that we've talked about tonight forward, as well as what Rights and Democracy is going to be up to in the March elections here in town.
So that party is going to be at the offices here in Burlington?
Yes,
And
right across the street, 241 North Winooski Ave.
Who's invited?
So Ollie Jang, City Councilor Ollie Jang will be there.
Everybody?
Everybody is invited.
Okay,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
wanted to make
I'm
sure
throwing
that
out some names.
outside of Burlington, but then so
No, I mean, it's-
speakers that will be there,
We
Ollie
definitely-
Jang.
Yeah, I mean,
city
we
councilor,
certainly
yep.
want,
Okay.
everyone
Okay.
who can come to,
Okay.
to be there and to learn how to plug in.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I think that's the show. Thank you guys so much for coming out and joining Rights and Democracy TV, making it another great show. And have a great month, viewers. We'll see you in December.